Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Kara Solomon, and I'm a conservation coordinator for the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. Tonight, I'm here with one of our community wildlife chapters, the South Wake Conservationists. Tonight, I'm going to be your moderator for our presentation. So if you have any questions at any point during the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat feature or in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and I will read them to our speaker at the end of the evening and at the end of his presentation. So again, if you have any questions at any point, go ahead and put them in the chat or the Q&A. So I'm really excited to be with you all tonight, and I'm going to pass the microphone over to the president of the South Wake Conservationists, Mr. Monty Murray.
All right. Can't beat an introduction like that. Thank you, Kara. All right. So good evening, everybody, and welcome. Before we get started with our featured speaker tonight, I usually take a few minutes, and I'll try and keep it short, just to kind of bring you up to date on what's going on with the chapter and things. If you're in the Raleigh area and you haven't been involved, we'd love to get you involved. Check out some of the things we do. We do a lot of different activities, all related to wildlife and conservation, but in a variety of forms. We are the South Wake Conservationists, as Carrie said. We're part of the North Carolina Wildlife Federation, but we're all volunteers, and we serve Wake County, including, excuse me, Raleigh and Point South. And our mission, our mission is to conserve and improve wildlife habitat and diversity through conservation projects and public outreach. So we've got some events coming up in the near term. I'll just point out a few of them and see if you might be interested in some of these. One is a bird walk that we've got coming up with a very experienced birder who's part of our team. And it's combined with sort of a citizen science thing where you'll be learning how to use eBird if you're not familiar with it while you're walking and looking at the birds. That's on February 15th from 9 to 11, and it's at Apex Community Park. And by the way, all of these things are on our calendar if you go to our website. So if you hear one of these and say, gee, that's interesting, what time did you say that was? Just go to the website. You'll see it on there, and you can click on it and register to come. They're all free. The next one is we have our quarterly Eco Kids Committee meeting. And there is a pretty good team of people that are very interested in trying to get kids connected with nature, not just us old folks, right? So this is an opportunity if you're interested in working with kids to help plan nature activities for kids. So that meeting is on February 17th from 7 to 8, and that's just a video conference. Let me know if you're interested in doing that. And if you haven't been before and you think you'd like to help working with kids or do some activities with them, I'd love to include you. The next one is a pollinator garden workday, and we're going to get a whole series of those going. John Kinsella is the head of our Garden for Wildlife team, and he's organizing these, and we're just getting started for the new year. So this is the first one. It's a pollinator garden workday at Millbrook Elementary School, and that'll be on February 20th from 10 a.m. to noon. And then finally, and this is a pretty big event that we're doing with the Wildlife Federation, is the Wildlife Habitat Steward Training. And this is leads to a certification with the National Wildlife Federation to be a habitat steward. So it's a really intense 3-day workshop. It's a lot of fun, and you're going to learn a lot. It's held February 28th to March 1st, so it's at the end of this month. It's filling up very quickly, so we'll probably have a waiting list pretty soon. So be sure to sign up before February 10th, which is the cutoff to do this. There's limited space, so I just want to make you aware of that one. We also are encouraging people to join our leadership team. Every year we rotate 3 of our 6 leadership positions. And the terms that are coming up this year are vice president, treasurer, and at-large position. And so we're encouraging new people to come in and take a spin at it. We'd love to have you involved and get you more active in setting a course for the chapter. If you are interested, please send an email to me. You'll see in the chat my email address, montymurray1@gmail.com. And then finally, I just want to make a plug. Please go to our website. You'll see it here on the bottom here, southwakeconservationist.org. That's where all the information is. It's kept pretty current. One last little public service announcement before I turn it over. We are working together with the North Carolina Wildlife Federation on a campaign that they are really pushing pretty hard this year. It's called Save Our Sounds, because our shallow sounds are in deep trouble. We're the only state in North Carolina, we're the only state that allows inshore shrimp trawling. And literally, it is devastating the plants and the water quality of our estuaries. For every single pound of shrimp that's harvested, 4 pounds of bycatch are destroyed. And you'll see the photo on the left there is kind of an example of all that bycatch, crabs and fish and all kinds of other marine wildlife. So we lose 4 pounds of them with every single pound of shrimp that we get. The fisheries, as a result, are collapsing. Well, a number of fish are already collapsed and others are on the verge. So we're asking for you to have your voice heard together with us, to tell your state senator and representative to bring a stop to this, so that we join the rest of the states in preventing fishing, inshore shrimp trawling in the inland waters. It's fine to do it offshore, not in the inland estuaries, which is a nursery. If you want to point your phone at that QR code, it'll pull up a very simple form. You put in your address and it'll automatically determine your senator and representative, and you can just send your note. Alternatively, I think, Kara, you're going to put in the chat the link to it, and you can go to it that way if you didn't catch it on the screen here. So tonight, I'm very pleased to welcome tonight our fisheries biologist with the Wildlife Resources Commission. He's with District 5, and he manages the sport fish species in the north central Piedmont lakes and rivers along the I-40 corridor. He has both a bachelor's degree and a master's in wildlife and fisheries management from Clemson University, where he studied smallmouth bass in the Broad River. He's very active with the American Fisheries Society. He's held various leadership roles there. He also enjoys spending his free time bass fishing in the Triangle reservoirs. And we're just talking about something coming up tomorrow. And competing against other area anglers in the local bass fishing tournaments. Tonight, we'll learn about sport fishes in the Piedmont, the invasive species that threaten them, and current research projects to monitor fish habitat. So please welcome Seth Mycko.
Hey everybody, how are y'all? Let me share my screen here. Here we go. All right, can everybody see that? All right, well, thanks for that lovely introduction, Monty. So like he said, I'm Seth Mycko. I'm one of the sport fish biologists here in District 5, which is basically everything from Randolph County in the Asheboro area over to Jordan Lake and all the way to Virginia, 11 counties there in the north central Piedmont. It's 3 major rivers and 27 reservoirs if you include all the city lakes less than 500 acres. So a lot of water, but a lot of spread out water within District 5. So a little bit about my background, which we already touched on a little bit there. I guess Ben Ricks has colloquially have termed me the bass fishing biologist when I had a podcast episode with them there. Went to Clemson University for both my degrees. I'm actually a fisheries rarity when it comes to that, where I went to the same school a couple years apart for both degrees. I'm a club bass angler and just an overall, bass fishing head. So, and if I can't get your answer, one of these fine folks in the state of North Carolina can get your answer about sport fish in the state. So we have 3 regional supervisors that are in charge of our 3 regions. Ben Ricks is on the coast. He's in charge of districts 1, 2, and 4. And then you can see here we have 2 biologists in each district. Our coastal biologists, Chris Smith and Dion, they're up there in the Pamlico Sound area and the Currituck area. So they cover all the coastal, inland coastal waters there. TD and Mason are in District 2. They have basically the entirety of the Neuse River down to the Albemarle Sound in the Pamlico area. And then Kyle and Maggie are down in District 6. They have the Cape Fear region of the state. And then in the Piedmont, which you're going to hear all about tonight, we have 3, 5, and 6. 3 is Kirk Rundle and David Belkowski. They have Sharon Harris Reservoir and many of the Roanoke River reservoirs up on the upstream of the Roanoke. And District 6 is the entirety of the Lower Yadkin chain and Lake Norman down to the down the Catawba River to the state line. And then in our western mountainous areas, we have biologists out there in District 7, Ken and Nancy. They have the trout waters of the New River, and they have the smallmouth up there in the New River, and they're in charge of a wide variety of species there in the foothills. And then in District 8, the same story there with all the cold water and cool water species. And we have David Goodford and TJ Johnson in District 8. And then all the way in the western part of the state, we have Powell and Amanda. They're out in District 9. They have all the deep, clear reservoirs in the western part of the state, and then a whole lot of trout water out there as well. So just feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any questions about any of these sport fisheries in these counties. And this is just a snapshot of the fish biologists we have in the state. There's a whole crew that does work with non-game fish and threatened and endangered species. So reach out to us and we can get your answer about anything aquatic in the state. But zooming into the Piedmont region, these are our main bodies of water that we work on in the Piedmont. We cover six major rivers from the Roanoke down to the Catawba. And a lot of those, are dotted with major reservoirs. So we work on Lake Norman a lot. We work on Lake Gaston. We have Falls Lake and Jordan Lake in the triangle, the Yadkin chain of lakes, the Hall River, the Uwharrie River. So we cover a lot of water in the state of North Carolina. And there's 6 of us covering all of these lakes and rivers in the state. So you can pretty much bet someday in the spring, in March or April, one of us are on one of these lakes somewhere. So feel free to track us down and wave to us if you see us out there in a workboat somewhere. But the bulk of our routine work, from throughout the entirety of the year is just routine fish surveys. You might have been out on the lake or the river and seen a net or electrofishing boat on the river shocking for fish, or a trap net on a reservoir sampling for crappie, and that's really a bulk of what we do in sport fish management side of the house. These are in lakes and rivers throughout North Carolina. We try to get to each reservoir annually or up to like a 10-year rotation. Our smaller reservoirs that are, less popular with anglers or less frequently fished, that those we get to them less frequently than a lake like Jordan or Sharon Harris. And the main goal of this work is just to monitor these fish populations, make sure the fish are there to be caught, and everything is happy and healthy in the lakes. Sorry, And then other benefits of this while we're out there in the spring in particular, we'll be collecting broodstock for our fish hatcheries. So whether that be straight up striped bass for our striped bass that we stock along the coast, or white bass for broodstock for our hybrid striped bass stocking in our reservoirs. Occasionally we'll be taking fish tissue samples for help with DQ or DHHS. If they are doing toxicity samples, we'll help them get samples for those tissues they're looking for. And then we can also do special research projects on, like, if fish is leaving the lake and going up the river, we can do, migrations and arrival timing from the lake to the river, and just overall research on those species as well, using our routine fishery surveys. So I polled all our Piedmont biologists, and I was like, hey, I'm presenting to some folks tonight. Where have y'all been recently? So we have very recent data in District 3 from the past couple of years from Lake Gaston, from Tar River Reservoir, from Sharon Harris, from Falls Lake, and from Tar River, the anadromous fish coming up the river in the spring. So you can see David here with a big striper they call it. This is probably a Tar River, mature Tar River, a true striper coming out of the ocean to run up the Tar River. This is probably on Lake Gaston, a gill net survey that they did for their reservoir striped bass in the lake, and then a crappie survey probably at Falls Lake there. So some good fish that they're catching. And you see D3 is right here in like that northeastern central part of the Piedmont.
That's almost as big as he is.
Yeah, they catch some big striper there in the tar. And that fish is probably lives most of its life in the ocean, just runs up the Tar River every spring to spawn and runs right back out to the ocean. And then I'm responsible for a lot of the city reservoirs. So I have a lot of the Greensboro city lakes, a lot of me and my counterpart Danny, we actually just hired a new biologist in the district in October. And he just started with me, and we're responsible for Greensboro city lakes, the Burlington city lakes, Lake Hyco, Mayo, and we've been to all these lakes recently. A lot of smaller waters, Oak Hollow being only about 800 acres. Camac is a reservoir in Alamance County. It's about 700, 800 acres. Jordan being one of our biggest lakes. So we've been to it in 2023. Went to Brant for a crappie survey. It's a small city lake in Greensboro. Randleman is a water supply co-op for the Greensboro area. Grand Mebane in Alamance County, McIntosh, Hyco, and the Eno River above Falls Lake. We do some white bass surveys there in the Eno. And you can see this is one of our former biologists who's now in District 7 holding some big bass out of Jordan Lake, and then some crappie from the Lake McIntosh crappie survey we just completed. And then in District 6, they've been to High Rock Lake recently. They've been to Cane Creek and Tuckertown. They've been out on Norman for a lot of, I think, hybrid striped bass surveys and largemouth Alabama bass surveys. They've been on Tomolex, Tillery, Baden, Blewett Falls, and Mountain Island. So they've been covering a lot of ground the past couple of years in District 6. And a fun fact about out of District 6 is this angler, this is actually a private pond, but this was a over 15-pound largemouth that an angler caught in District 6 that was like less than a pound short of the state record. So that was a fun thing that he shared with us. And he thought he had the state record, but he was just a little shy. And it looks like we got some chats coming in. Do we need to answer any questions while we're at a good stopping point?
Not yet. I think we'll save them to the end, but anyone, if you have a question, go ahead and put it in the chat.
Yeah,
and I'll pose
because
it
I've
to
got
Seth.
some pretty distinctive breaks built in here. So if we want to take any questions here, it'd be probably a good time.
I have a question. Can you hear?
Yeah, John. Is that John?
Yeah.
Hey, John.
Does your organization your agency interact very frequently with the different fishermen's organizations?
Yeah, we do. So we partner with NC Bass Nation a lot. And then there's a new group, which is kind of a offshoot of NC Bass Nation. That's actually a funding partner for our F1 stocking efforts. And yeah, small bass clubs, small crappie fishing clubs. We try to get out to them as often as possible.
If you have a species which all of a sudden has a drop in population, and you might be concerned about their population status, do you then coordinate like a game plan with the organizations to try to return that species to a more healthy number?
Yeah, and that's where our regulation authority comes in. So, we can, every year we have a regulation cycle where biologists, if they think there's an issue at one reservoir or one river or one stretch of a river even, we'll propose a regulation for that species for that cycle. And that's a whole public involvement period where there's, basically a year long of public hearings, letting the public know about the proposal. It gets, proposed to our commission and approved by our board of commissioners. And, it's just a whole process where we go from data to regulation proposal to a new regulation. And we don't change regulations a whole lot, especially for our sport fish species. Every now and again, something like a white bass regulation might change, but we're pretty steady with a lot of our regulations, and especially in the Piedmont. But that changes, especially coastal and mountains. That they do a lot of more steady regulation changes than our stable reservoirs, for sure.
Do you get a lot of resistance it seems like, it's not that uncommon to, get resistance in terms of fishermen or the public. And it seems like it's pretty frequent. It happened up in the Chesapeake where you might do surveys and come up with a population estimate, but then the fishermen and people interested come up, and usually they come up with a much larger number in the population than your organization may. Is that fairly common?
Yeah, luckily, especially in reservoirs, our populations are very stable year over year, and in very recent history, a lot of anglers are actually moving less towards harvest oriented fishing and more towards, trophy fishing and just snapping a quick photo for a social media and then letting that fish go. So we really don't, in inland freshwaters, we don't deal as much with, the over harvest issues or things like that. So I guess it's kind of fortunate that I don't deal with it, but I also don't get the experience either.
Thank you.
All right, I guess we'll move on to some of the not so good things we got out there right now. And some of them are being moved pretty regular throughout the state. So we're in charge of sport fish, and we also have invasive sport fish, which have become popular with anglers who love to fish for these species, but they're a very, very bad invasive fish in just about anywhere you put them. They're never a good story. Flathead catfish and blue catfish being two of the main issues in a lot of our large reservoirs, where I think at Gaston they've developed a pretty robust blue catfish fishery, and that those blue cats are causing some issues with some other sport fish there in Lake Gaston. And then flatheads within District 5 are becoming more numerous throughout District 5 and starting to cause some issues here and there. So I'll get into some of these. This is enemy number 1 in the state of North Carolina. These used to be known as the spotted bass, but some genetic tools have shown us that they're now called Alabama bass. They're native to central Alabama, and they're just an overall menace. They get in these reservoirs, they overpopulate, they shrink up, and they're just not great for a good bass fishery. So just a little bit of background on the Alabama bass in particular. Alabama spotted bass, most diehard fishermen will call them a spotted bass. The genetic difference was confirmed in the early 2000s, around 2008 or 9. They've been in Lake Norman since about the same time frame. So the fish we used to think were spotted bass in Lake Norman, we now know are Alabama bass. They've been in Lake Gaston since about 2012. Now they're in the Tar River system and the Roanoke River below all the reservoirs. So that's not a good sign of keeping them contained, and they're moving around on their own, it seems, in the river systems down east. And they are easy to catch, but they overpopulate, and the growth rate decreases as their population increases. So, you'll have a lake full of fish, but they'll all be 10 to 12 inches long, most of them. So it's really not a fun fishing opportunity for anglers to just go out there and catch 30 little 12-inch bass when there used to be, 5, 6, 7-pound bass being caught. So it's not necessarily a replacement. It's like a displacement of largemouth into a stunted Alabama bass fishery, which is a major change for some of our reservoirs, historically speaking. And they compete with largemouth and just, elbow them out of town, basically. And they decrease our largemouth bass growth rates with their competition in the lake.
How did they get there, Seth?
It's a lot of it is angler introductions. So the Savannah River, it started in the Savannah chain of lakes on the Georgia-South Carolina border, where they were brought from their native range there. Those populations were established in the 90s in the Savannah chain, and they just marched their way up in probably in bass boat live wells north from there. So we think, they fight hard, they're predictable. If you have a point that has them on it, you can go to that point and catch them on that point just about, every time you go to that lake. But they're just an overall menace when it comes to largemouth bass and our native bass in the state. They just elbow them out of town. And the fisheries in the mountains where we have smallmouth bass, there's a genetic mixing issue, which is a way bigger red flag for all of us. not necessarily a worse problem, or it's just a major different problem where they're actually genetically mixing with smallmouth bass, and we're seeing, basically just our true pure smallmouth bass in the native portion of their range in the western part of the state, they're getting genetically swamped out by these Alabama bass. So they just are just becoming overall menace, and they're becoming just about every river in the state now has these somewhere in the river system, whether that be the riverine portion or a reservoir within the river. So we're trying to make sure everybody knows that we have them where we have them, and we don't want them moving from where they are. So if you like catching them where they are, just enjoy them where they are and don't move them anymore from where they're currently distributed.
Do you have a formula in terms of, control?
We don't. So once it happens, and we will monitor the displacement, and we can actually graph, largemouth versus Alabama bass abundance, and it actually switches where we'll have additional abundance of Alabama bass and less abundance of largemouth over time. It's like an X if you drew it out on a graph, and it's just a displacement of one population into another.
Do the Alabama bass, do they bring in any type of parasites or?
No, nothing to be concerned there. That they're still a black bass species. They're relatives of our largemouth and our smallmouth, which is why they can so easily breed with our smallmouth. But just our native bass fisheries are really at risk of being just overall taken over by these fish, and our smallmouth are probably gonna be an endangered fish in the state of North Carolina the more the genetic swamp goes on in the reservoirs out there in the mountain reservoirs. We've done a lot of genetics work with this where we're seeing, fish come back in with like 70% Alabama genes, and, just various mixtures of smallmouth Alabama bass mixtures coming in those genetic results. So, but they're here to stay. They're in a lot of our reservoirs and a few of our rivers, and unfortunately they're here to stay, and we just don't want anybody moving them around from where they are now. And Virginia is just starting to catch this too. Some of the southern Virginia reservoirs like Philpott and Kerr, right on the border of North Carolina, Virginia. Some people call it Bugs Island. It now has Alabama bass in it as well. And we presume that all of those are just, as soon as one lake gets established, the anglers will grab them out of that lake and move them to a reservoir closer to their house, probably is the end goal for the angler. So this is just a current distribution map as of the year of 2024. Luckily, in the Raleigh Triangle region, to my knowledge, we still don't have any Alabama bass in the Raleigh area or in the northern tip of District 5. But as you can see, a lot of our mountain reservoirs and rivers have them. Pretty much the entire Catawba River, which, Lake Norman was where the epicenter of Alabama bass in North Carolina was, the Lake Norman Lookout Shoals area. And then there are some in Ballew's Creek, which is offshoot of the Dan River, and then in the Dan below Ballew's Creek, we have found some Alabama bass there in those stretches, and then up here in District 3 in Gaston and Kerr, we now confirm that Alabama bass are present in those systems as well. So that's the main enemy of our reservoirs. And down on the coast, they have a flathead catfish issue. So flatheads eat a lot of fish, and they do it well. They eat a lot of our native bullheads and our native white catfish in the coastal rivers, and they eat a lot of the shad and herring that run up those rivers in the spring to complete their life cycle. So flatheads they have become a issue on the coast for many years now. And luckily we don't have a northern snakehead problem like coastal Virginia does. There's been reports of one caught here or there, but those have always been bowfin. And you can see here, if you catch a fish that looks kind of like a snakehead. It might be a bowfin. Just look at his anal fin here and make sure it doesn't, it's not a long anal fin. It's more of a short anal fin right here. So we get a lot of calls about bowfin being captured that, people might misidentify as a snakehead. So luckily no snakeheads in North Carolina currently. And then blue catfish are becoming more of a reservoir issue. So they get in, they're just really a lot like Alabama bass. They get in these reservoirs, they reproduce very well, they have high biomasses, they displace a bunch of other catfish species, they eat native mussels within those systems, and they eat any shad or herring they can get their mouth around. So they've become a big issue in our reservoirs in particular. All right, so any questions? We can take some questions on the invasive sport fish. A lot of these fish do have regulations, but we are not managing for these sport fishes. They are invasive fish in the state of North Carolina.
Are bowfin considered invasive?
No, bowfin are native fish to North Carolina, to mainly the eastern half of the state. But they're dinosaurs. They've been around for eons. They've been in the rivers since before the settlers even got here. But a snakehead is an Asiatic fish that was brought over many years ago. And Virginia, the coastal rivers of Virginia have some level of an issue with snakeheads, but we have not found any snakeheads in the state of North Carolina yet. And I think even South Carolina has had them pop up here and there along the coast of South Carolina.
Seth, in terms of control, I'm wondering, is there any appetite for doing some programs to control or eliminate these invasive fish if there is destructive as it sounds like they are? Like, for instance, in Lake Superior, they had a long running program to eliminate the sea lamprey, which was an awful invasive problem, and they've pretty much licked it. That was a pretty big problem to solve. Is that something that's doable with these, or is that just not in the cards?
Yeah, these fish are socially tricky, especially the catfish, because they get so big that anglers love catching them. And there has been, some social pressure to protect the large individuals of these populations, but we've been pretty steadfast in maintaining that we don't like these fish here. We don't want these fish here, and we're not protecting them in any way. So especially our Alabama bass regulations, we have no creel limit and no size limit. So if you want to go to Lake Norman and keep 150 Alabama bass in a day, we love people doing that. So that's our main thing right now, is driving home that we don't want them here, and we want people to get as many out of these lakes as they can. There are a few regional catfish limits, and like a trophy limit at some of our reservoirs, but a lot of those are more social than they are biological.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I know it's not your district, but do you know if blue catfish have been found in Jordan or Harris Lake?
No, I don't think so. Definitely not in Jordan to my knowledge, and I don't think that they've ever encountered them at Harris either.
Okay.
The triangle seems to be in a good invasive sport fish bubble, in that we have a lot of big largemouth and a lot of big crappie. So I think a lot of our fishermen are happy with that, and not bringing in anything from outside.
Thank you.
Has there been a change in the population at Jordan Lake?
No, well, if anything, it's gotten better. Jordan Lake is.
I'm a lousy fisherman there.
Well, the pressure is a whole different story, which we could go into later. How fishing pressure can affect angler success. But Jordan's actually going through a bit of a eutrophication, where the amount of nutrients flowing into it are higher than it's ever been. So the fish are just booming as a result. Our crappie survey in 23 was massive. I think we caught 1,200 fish in 4 nights during the crappie survey. So all the nutrient input into Jordan is just pumping them fish right up, and they're growing fast and growing big. But it does get a lot of fishing pressure too, which does hamper angler success rates. And I do concede to that, but the bass are still there to be caught. My phone rings all the time, but I can't. I haven't caught bass in a while at Jordan. I'm like, they're still in there. I promise. We see them. Just keep going after them.
Yeah, I fished that lake about 20 years ago and was killing them. And then I fished there, a few years ago and basically struck out.
Yeah. Yeah. We did our largemouth survey there was in 2023, and luckily we caught it just right. It was, it had come up in a big flood with a rainfall and a bunch of big bass in the bushes when we were surveying there. So they're in there, but they're getting really smart. A lot of those big bass are 8 to 12 years old, and they've seen a lot of lures in those eight years of life. So you just gotta try to be sneaky and trick them with some sneaky stuff, or try areas you haven't tried before. All right. Any of these questions? And we can always circle back later, but I'm gonna get to some cool stuff that we're doing in the Piedmont. Some of these are statewide projects. So I think we just wrapped up last year our statewide black bass genetics baseline. So we now have surveyed black bass genetics from just about every river or reservoir in the state, and we have the allelic frequency of Florida bass or northern bass genetics in the state. And I'll have some more results on that here. I am personally doing a tournament captured bass genetics project where we're going to weigh-ins at bass tournaments, and we're clipping these 8 to 10 pound fish that are being brought into tournaments and seeing if those are going to be genetically distinct from the bass we're seeing in our just statewide bass surveys. We have a F1 stocking program now where we're stocking a first generation cross of a Florida and a northern bass in 3 reservoirs in the state. We have a community fishing program, which is closer to home for a lot of people. It's probably in most people's backyards. These are where we stock channel catfish, and usually in park ponds in large cities. We have winter trout stockings, which a lot of those winter trout have probably been caught out by now, but I'll get into that a little bit. And then what's become a big task for District 5 biologists is reservoir habitat enhancement, where we're planting native plants in our reservoirs. So we just wrapped up our baseline black bass genetics, and we found a lot of muck bass in the state. Basically, what it boils down to is we have more pure Florida bass on the eastern part of the state in our eastern lakes and rivers. And as you move towards the mountains, we have more Florida genes, and especially in the middle part of the state, we have a lot of these fish that are like 60% Florida bass and 40% northern bass. And this is an ever evolving realm of science. Every year there's more, fish genetics work that come out, and taxonomists and geneticists will, either describe a new species based on new genetic discoveries, or lump species together based on genetic discoveries. And fish genetics is a very rapidly growing realm of scientific research. And part of that is this F1 stocking that a lot of states are moving to now. These fish are a first generation cross of a pure Florida bass and a pure northern bass. And we actually purchased these fish from a sport fish hatchery in Alabama, and we're stocking them in Norman, Gaston and Jordan Lake. We're trying to stock about 4 to 7 fish per acre, and they're about 2.5 inches when we put them in, but they should grow to very large sizes. And because of their hybrid vigor, because they're the first generation cross of 2 pure strain parents, they should have that hybrid vigor where they'll be more aggressive, larger, just an overall higher caliber of fish. So this project will take 7 years to complete, and we'll know if it's a success. You'll see a lot of us at tournament weigh-ins to come fin clip bass that are coming in and make sure our F1s are being caught and brought into weigh-ins. And it's just an overall experiment. So we're trying to do it on a trophic gradient where Lake Norman's very low productivity. Gaston's kind of middle of the road as far as nutrient inflow, and Jordan is hyper eutrophic on most. So it'll really tell us how these fish do at those three different trophic levels, trophic states of reservoirs for sure. And we'll be able to compare and contrast. Since we're stocking about the same amount in each reservoir, we'll be able to compare and contrast how the fish do on a per capita basis in these different levels of nutrients. You know, typically a higher productivity system will grow a fish faster and larger. So we'll see if that runs true for our F1s as well. And this is typically where I get a lot of questions. So I'll pause here in case anybody has questions about what is an F1, why are we doing it, that kind of thing.
Has North Carolina ever been involved in, the destruction of dams to, improve the fish flow? I know they did that recently in the state of Washington.
Yep. So we have a whole nother group of the Wildlife Commission called the Aquatic Wildlife Diversity Unit, and they actually work hand in hand with American Rivers and other groups as they remove, they're typically derelict textile mill dams and run of the river dams in our smaller rivers. But they'll go in and they'll remove the threatened mussel species before the dam is removed and all that sediment is deposited downstream, or they'll do bank stabilization after the dam's removed. And there's a whole group of folks working on, dam removals and where are the best ones to remove and what ones shouldn't be removed because there might be an invasive fish downstream that could then get upstream. And a lot of people thinking about dam removals in the state of North Carolina. They're typically smaller run of the river dams that are very, very old too. I think there was one on the Deep River down near Monker that was removed 10-ish years ago. And there was a huge project as a result of that. And sometimes there's even funding that we get as a result of a dam removal.
Is that a huge political issue?
It can be, yeah. Some of these dams are water supplies and things like that. So it can be an issue for the local community or things. But, the engineers will get involved and figure out where to run water pipes to new water sources, and a lot of people will get involved in a dam removal effort for sure. A lot of NGOs even. There's a group called American Rivers that's highly involved in dam removals across the entire nation.
Thank you.
All right. So you're going to see us a lot if you're a bass fisherman in the Piedmont. You're going to get to know me and David Belkowski and Danny and Kelsey and Casey and Troy a lot. We're going to be fin clipping these bass that come in to make sure these F1s are coming in tournament bags. So we'll be set up at a lot of different weigh-ins throughout Gaston, Norman, and Jordan. And we'll just be fin clipping fish as they come in. You can't really look at these largemouth and see if they're F1s, so we have to fin clip them, put it in a vial, ship the vial to a genetics lab, and then get the results from there. And we'll also be doing fin clips during our routine electrofishing surveys to see if we encounter any just as we're out sampling the largemouth as well. So this will be a long-term project that'll probably take us 8 to 10 years to figure out how effective our F1 efforts were. And then our habitat enhancement on our reservoirs, I'll probably end with this. Or no, I got one more thing at the end. I'm sorry. So I think, Mona, you said you were involved in some of this work at Sharon Harris, where we did both native planting and our artificial habitat with our PVC pipe structures and things like that.
Yeah.
And we also cut and cable trees where we'll find a dead or dying oak tree on the bank or a poplar tree, and we'll cut it and then cable it back to its stump, and that just adds both a place for an angler to fish, and it adds habitat for crappie and bass to get around and hang out. and feed and forage and get bigger. So we do a lot of this basically from April to October. We don't in the Piedmont, we don't really handle a lot of fish, and we're out doing a lot of the habitat enhancement work on our reservoirs in particular. One aspect of that is our artificial. These are usually a commercial mossback style structure where they have like one PVC trunk and then some plastic limbs through it. These are all the same pipe that water that it's all PVC, water pipe. So there's no issue with drinking water or anything. It's just, the same pipe that runs right into your house and right to your sink. But it just adds, it adds a place for fish to hide out and juvenile fish to escape predators, and it also allows predator fish places to forage, which is great for our anglers. And we put all this on our website and show them where these are. And this is always a fun day where we get to go out with chainsaws and cut and cable these trees down and, just overall add more fish habitat to the lake where there wasn't already some. And I'll stop here for any of the artificial / tree questions. And this is the benefit both, especially our artificial habitats, the benefit the angler and the fish. It's a good thing where we kill two birds with one stone. The fish have somewhere to hide and the anglers have somewhere to target the fish that are hiding there. And it's been, especially at Sharon Harris, I think we sank 600 or 700 of these back in the 2021 time frame. So there's a lot of these plastic attractors, mossback style attractors in Harris Reservoir.
How deep are those sunk? I'm just thinking of boats getting hung up with their props.
Duke has guidance on that. I think at Sharon Harris it's like a 13-foot. So if you see a buoy, it's less, the attractor will be in less than 15 feet of water if there's a buoy there. But there's also a lot that do not have a buoy, and I think it's either it might be 20 feet. So if the point is on our website and the buoy's not there, then it's probably in 20 feet or deeper of water. But they're anywhere from, at Harris, we even have coves that have danger buoys in front of them. And it says danger fishing cove on the buoy. And I think there's attractors in less than 3 feet in those coves. So especially at Harris, they're 3 to 25 feet. But at a lot of reservoirs, they'll be 15 to 20 feet deep. And then these, of course, are right on the shoreline. So, and these are actually, the trees are actually some of the most popular when they're fresh. We'll get calls a week or two after we fall them that someone went and caught a big bass off of a tree we just cut down. So that's always rewarding to be able to cut a tree into the lake and then have an angler say, "Oh, I just caught a big bass off the tree you cut down." So that's a really rewarding part of my job in particular, because I'm in tune with these anglers and they reach out with both their pleasure and their displeasure. So it's good to hear about their pleasure from time to time. But this is becoming a huge part of what we do with our native vegetation projects, where we're basically building gardens in the lake and putting native plants within those gardens. We deal with a lot of turtle herbivory, where turtles will try to get in these exclosures and eat our plants. And if it wants to eat a plant, then we deal with it trying to get in there. So we'll build these exclosure fences. And then we try to fill the fences full of plants, but also we want the plants to get out of those fences as well and spread throughout the cove they're in. And just some benefits of these plants: they're all native aquatic plants that are native to the rivers we're planting them in. They provide nursery habitat for small fish, and they'll uptake nutrients in places where we have excess nutrients running into the reservoir. They'll help absorb some of that phosphorus coming into the reservoir, and they have a lower propensity to overtake shallow areas, whereas like a nuisance weed like hydrilla or a parrot feather will just overtake an entire cove. These plants will not do that. They don't have that growth history and life history, and they're just a natural guard against those invasive plants. If we put these natural native plants there before hydrilla can get established, and maybe the hydrilla will never even have a chance to get established. And in some of our reservoirs, we have banks that are eroding from wave action and things. So these plants really help us with some bank stabilization efforts in our reservoirs in particular. Our current projects that we're doing these in, we have a small lake in High Point called Oak Hollow. It's one of our oldest projects, and a lot of these pictures on the bottom are from Oak Hollow. Sharon Harris is one of our newest. Sharon Harris and Heiko are both one of our newest projects. They're kind of in their infancy right now. These are probably career-long goals for us younger biologists. We've had a very long-standing project at Gaston, which has been a partnership with the power company there and several partners there at Lake Gaston. Townsend, we've kind of slowed our roll at Townsend, but we still have some plants growing up at Townsend. Grand Mevin's a very, very new project we're working on in Alamance County. They've done a lot of this at High Rock Lake, at Tuckertown, and I've got Townsend listed twice there. We plant more than 4,000 pots a year. So whether that be a cool little quart pot with one water willow stem in it, or a gallon pot full of pickerel weed, we plant over 4,000 pots in these reservoirs a year. And these are white water lily, which has a beautiful white flower in the spring. Spatter dock, which many people have probably seen, an emergent species that comes out of the water a little bit. Water willow, which is like kind of a bank grass. A lot of anglers call it Baden grass because Baden has historically had a lot of natural water willow in it. We plant bulrushes, maiden cane, pickerelweed, eelgrass, coontail, and we're all the time trying to establish native plants that can be very popular with turtles and get eaten as quick as we plant them.
I was telling you, we volunteered to help with the commission when they were doing some work at, planting lilies and that sort of stuff at Harris. But our group is actually going to be planting some pickerel weed at Bass Lake, which is a very small lake here in Holly Springs, this spring, which we're buying from a nursery. But you raise this stuff. I'm looking at an opportunity here. Can you provide some of these plants if we plant them in some of our local lakes?
We should be able to do that at a certain level. We earmark a lot of our plants for our projects, but we can probably do away with at least 20 or 30 individual pots. I can see, and we're hoping to expand our greenhouse eventually. So once our new greenhouse is built, then definitely we'll have plenty of plants to go around for sure. But that's more than a year or two. Yeah. Down the road.
All right. We'll be talking.
This is the concept of this. Kansas and some of the Midwestern states kind of came up with this concept where, we get them growing in the fence, and then we want these little seedlings and natural sproutings to come off of the where we planted them, and then soon you'll just have your old fence there and then a cove full of shoreline vegetation, which is great for fish and great for anglers who want to, target fish within the vegetation. So now I'll get into our community fishing program. We stock channel catfish, and a lot of these channel catfish are stocked in park ponds. They could be 20-acre ponds in the middle of the city. And these just provide additional fishing opportunities for people in large cities. We're usually partnering with municipalities with these. And these usually have great accommodations for anglers that don't have good access, So if you're in a wheelchair, these places usually have a wheelchair accessible ramp down to the pier. They have solar powered fish feeders that feed the catfish, and close parking, is probably less than a 20-30 foot walk down to these ponds. And we also stock winter trout at many of these. And these are all thanks to our trout hatcheries in the mountains that they've been pumping out some trout for us. So every fall they'll call us and say, hey, we got all these trout, where y'all want us to put them? So we'll put our heads together and decide where to stock winter trout. And you've probably seen these press releases go out where we stock these surplus trout from the mountains, and it's basically any fish they had left over that they didn't stock in the mountains, they'll send our way. They're usually 7 to 14 inches long. Occasionally they'll stock like a 15-inch brooder. And Setzer is growing the majority of these fish, especially now. I don't know if anybody heard about the issues we had after the hurricane at Armstrong, but Setzer's growing just about every trout in the state right now. And all of this, most of this work couldn't have been done without volunteers. They're essential to just about every habitat project. And just, reach out to me if you want to volunteer and get out there and get dirty with us in the lakes and rivers. And just a little bit of a plug for the fisheries side of the Wildlife Commission. We do have a podcast now with our assistant chief and our coastal region supervisor. So they every month they try to put out a podcast. In January they covered the aquatic animal response to natural disasters. They've talked to bass pros from the state of North Carolina. They talked about nuisance and invasive species. Just all wide ranging list of topics about fishing and fisheries in the state of North Carolina. So be sure to look that up. Again, if you want to call us, you can reach out to any of these folks in the state. And with that, I'll take any questions. And I do have more about pond management if we want to get into that tonight as well. If anybody's interested in, managing a farm pond for good fishing.
While Kara's getting the questions together, I do have one other question. When you showed the winter trout, which are, I guess they're hatcheries in the mountains, they're cold water, right? So is that right? So when you bring them down to the Piedmont, is that, do they only make it through the winter and then it's too hot for them, or what happens?
Yeah, the latest I've ever heard of one being captured is around March, the March time frame, and those have become very popular with the local fishing community. So I doubt they even last very long. Once we put them in there, they probably get called out very quick. But the ones that do remain probably survive to about March or April before the water gets too hot again for them.
Yeah.
And those have become very popular in the places we're doing it. We're all the time getting requests for, can you add our pond? Can you add our park? So we hope to, once our renovations at Armstrong are done and then some work at Setzer gets done, then maybe we'll even be able to expand that down the road. But there's a huge rebuilding process we have to do at Armstrong to get our trout online there.
I had asked a similar question. Are trout actually found in lakes? Because I know, like Monty said, they like the cold water,
They do.
moving water. Yeah, I know there are lake trouts, but how common are they in lakes?
Yeah. So actually, there's a whole podcast episode about the trout in Lake Hiwassee. So it's a reservoir. It's way out in the mountains. So it is a deep, cool reservoir, but it is a lake. And there's big brown trout that actually forage on a special little forage fish that's in that reservoir. And yeah, so there are some lakes. Most of the lakes that have trout are all in our mountain regions. And then I guess occasionally one might, filter out of one of these park ponds downstream into a larger reservoir, after a flood or something, but that's probably pretty rare.
New Jersey's probably not known for trout, but they had some pretty good trout streams up there.
Yeah. Once you get to that, meat of the Appalachian Mountains, that's where you get into that the true meat of the trout waters. We have a lot of the southern Appalachian trout waters. We're at the southern tip of some of our trout ranges, and brook trout are our only native trout to the state of North Carolina. Even though we do stock all 3 species, the brook trout are the only native trout.
Of our questions in the chat so far. His only other questions are pickerel or eels found in North Carolina?
Yeah, so they actually scurry through the Jordan Dam. We've seen them at the causeway at White Oak Creek. We've seen an eel or two. And they're all throughout the coastal rivers, of course, but we've seen them even in the reservoirs in the Piedmont here and there. Very rare, but we've still incidentally came across a few. And that they're just like any other anadromous fish, where they're running up the rivers as far as they can get. And there's actually an eel ladder on the Catawba River. It might be it might be in North Carolina, but it's on the river. It's like a run of the river dam on the Catawba, and they actually have a special eel passage on that dam where they're putting in pipes and things that eels can scurry up to get over the dam.
How about pickerel?
Yeah, lots of pickerel in Mayo, a reservoir up near the Virginia border. They tend to like vegetation. So anywhere we have a lot of aquatic vegetation, we see a lot more pickerel.
Arnold is asking, have any trout been stocked in Wake County?
Yes, I think we try to spread them out around the population centers in particular. I can't tell you off the top of my head what ponds get them, but I know they go to Wake County, Guilford County. Yeah, get a lot of trout. And those numbers will change year to year. It's just based on the amount of surplus we get from our hatcheries. So, and you can call us usually around the first week of December. You can call us and say, "Hey, where are the trout going and how many are coming?" And we can look up those numbers and let you know. And hopefully we'll be able to continue it. There will be an ebb time where we're going to be doing a lot of construction work at our trout hatcheries, and there probably won't be a lot of surplus during those construction efforts. So during that time of it'd probably be a couple year span where we don't do a ton of the winter trout stocking.
Do you have like a partnership with the fish hatcheries?
Well, yeah, we own the fish hatchery. So we have a hatchery staff, we have a superintendent at every hatchery, and we have, several technicians that help the superintendent grow all the fish. We have our catfish hatchery down at McKinney Lake. We have 2 trout hatcheries. We have like a warm water, cool water hatchery in Table Rock, where they grow some of our muskie and some of our walleye, some of the kind of different species that we're not putting everywhere. And then we have a warm water hatchery down on the coastal plain called Watha, and that's where they grow all the striped bass that stock along the coast.
There are actually muskie found in North Carolina.
Yeah, they're native to the French Broad. And one of our biologists, that would actually be really cool guest for you guys. His name's Scott Loftus, and he's been doing a whole muskie spawning habitat restoration along the French Broad River because it's been so channelized. So he's been putting in sloughs and native vegetation and partnering with land conservancies to buy land along the river and bring back these natural backwater sloughs where the muskie go in and spawn. So that would probably be a great additional presentation for you guys to try to get one day.
He's asking, what are the...
Did we want to take the full hour and a half today? Or because I do have more if you want me to keep going.
Let me see how many more questions we've got here.
Okay.
So far, it looks like we have one more question. Courtney's asking, what are the biggest environmental issues that native bass face in our state besides competition with Alabama bass and other invasive fishes?
Algae blooms, especially some of our reservoirs are getting hyper-eutrophic. So in the summertime, that'll result in a lot of algal issues. And of course, algae consumes oxygen. So that's not good for any fish in any water, for the oxygen they need to breathe to be consumed by algae and things like that. So, just limiting your fertilizer use and not fertilizing before a big rain event and things like that can all help, reduce the amount of algal bloom issues in the summertime, especially if we get a long prolonged drought that can really affect our reservoirs in particular. But we're pretty blessed in the Piedmont with lots of fish and lots of big fish, especially in my district in particular. I can't even hardly point to one reservoir where I think there might be an issue right now. So I'm actually pretty blessed when it comes to fish science. But that's just, one snapshot of one state. There's plenty of work to be done.
He also says that she knows it's not your district, but she hasn't seen any striped bass in the Pamlico or Pungo rivers in years and wasn't sure what was going on with those fisheries.
Yeah, I can't speak exactly to that, but there definitely is some issues with the true coastal striped bass. And I would have to reach out to those biologists to know the nuances of that decline. But there does seem to be some issues surrounding true, stripers coming from the ocean and the coastal rivers. Ben Ricks would be the man to ask for that.
Well, Seth, why don't you tell us about fish pond management? I think you got a few more minutes.
Yeah, it's so yeah, I know a lot of people might own a pond or know somebody with a pond, and pond management can be very involved. You can be either very hands-on or very hands-off. You probably want to set a goal for your pond, whether that be good fishing, good plant community. You'll want just goals or overall goal for your pond. We have stocking permits, so any pond that drains to a stream, you have to go through us to get a stocking permit to stock fish into your pond. You'll want to set your desirable species. You want to set your stocking rate, and I'll get into all this. Hopefully, we got about a half hour, less than a half hour now, don't we? And then grass carp can be a good thing in a pond if you want to control some nuisance vegetation. You want good habitat, and then you want to try to control fish kills. Fish kills can be very, very pronounced in some farm ponds. So first, you want to set your goals. Do you want to catch big fish or do you want to catch lots of fish? Typically, you can't have both in a small pond. You want to choose whether you want big fish or lots of fish. That's step one. And then do you want just bass or do you want bass, bluegill, catfish, crappie? You got to choose what you want there. And then how much effort and money do you want to spend on a pond? Supplemental feeding and fertilizing can get very expensive. So you want to decide whether you want to invest those resources into things like that. And then you do need a fish stocking permit from us. So if your pond's outlet flows into a stream, or if a stream flows into your pond, you have to apply for a fish stocking permit to stock that pond. You can call us and discuss your options for what fish species, how many. We can guide you through all that. You'll return that application to us. You'll wait for your approval, and then you have to give us a 72-hour notice before stocking. And that is actually a brand new thing that we've started for 2025, where you got to give us a 72-hour notice. So basically how it works is you'll contact your district biologist, you'll submit your application via email, or you can mail it to us. We'll do our internal review, and we'll either issue or deny your stocking permit. You'll receive your permit. You can order your fish based on the permitted specifications, which you can talk to your district biologist about prior to applying. Give us a 72-hour notice, and then stock your pond. And then the desired fish species for most ponds is just bass and brim. Most people call them brim. That's usually a suite of sunfish, whether that be red ear, bluegill, and other sunfishes. But other optional fish is like a green sunfish, which can eat some fish that largemouth like to eat. So we don't always like to recommend green sunfish. And then also catfish can compete with bass as well. So if you want good bass fishing, you just want bass and brim in your pond. And this is straight out of our stocking recommendations from our pond management guide. For an unfertilized pond, you want to put in about 350 bluegill per acre, 150 red ear. You can throw in some channel catfish, and you want to keep your largemouth number low in a pond because they can really overpopulate in a small farm pond. And then if you're doing adults, you want to drop those numbers way down and stock just a few adults. And it's typically harder to source adults than it is fingerlings. and the adults will be much more expensive than fingerlings as well. These are just some alternative rates. You can do like adults and fingerlings, or you can even get hybrid sunfish, and there's several pond stocking options, and we can guide you down those. If you ever reach out for questions on stocking your pond, we can let you know. So if you're stocking an existing pond, if it's not a new pond, then the same permitting process will apply. And then you'll want to assess your current fish population. You can use a catch and harvest log. So as you fish, you can go out and say, I caught 2 bass today and I harvested 1 of those. You can keep that log over time, and that'll help us guide you in your decisions in stocking the pond. And then you can consult with us on recommended rates. If you tell us, hey, I got a lot of little bass in my pond, we can say, hey, maybe you don't need to stock that pond at all, or we can guide your situation based on what you tell us about your pond. Just reach out to us. And we do no longer make any site visits for private waters. A lot of the states have done that in the 80s and early 90s, but we've since gotten out of making house calls to ponds. You can reach out to us on the phone and email anytime, but we don't really go out and do site level visits for ponds. There's several pond management companies that do that nowadays. And a harvest log is a great thing to do if you own a pond or fish a pond often, and you just want to keep a harvest log of what you're harvesting throughout the years. So you typically want to set a harvest goal for the year, and this will just help you get that harvest goal. And that goal can be different based on your pond's scenario. If you got a lot of small bass, you might want to keep more. Or if you got a lot fewer large fish, you might want to keep less. So a harvest log just helps you keep track of what you're harvesting out of your pond. And we'll even help review that data with you and help guide you through how to harvest a pond. So these are just the generally rule of thumb for harvesting fish from your pond. You always want to harvest as you go along, because these fish are reproducing and creating more of themselves. So you want to kind of keep that population in check and keep everything balanced. So typically for an unfertilized pond, you want to harvest about 10 or 15 pounds per acre of bass and about 70 pounds of brim per year. And harvest will vary based on channel catfish. Channel catfish don't do as well a job at reproducing in a small pond, so then you'll want to monitor harvest based on that. So it's usually easy to tell your condition of your pond. If you're catching a lot of fish of a lot of different sizes, all your bass are different sizes, all your sunfish are different sizes, you probably have a pretty balanced pond. And it's pretty easy to tell if your pond's unbalanced. If all your bluegill are large bluegill and all your bass are small, you probably have more of an overcrowded bass situation where the bass aren't being able to eat the large bluegill, and the bluegill outgrow the bass and they won't be able to eat them. That's a very common scenario in a lot of farm ponds that don't get harvested a lot. And then you can also have overcrowded bluegill where all your bluegill will get stunted out, and you'll have one big or several big bass in there eating all the bluegill and getting fat off the small bluegill. So just keep an eye on what you're catching, and then that can give you a really good idea of if your pond's balanced or unbalanced. And you're always trying to monitor your harvest and harvest just enough to keep your pond balanced and not over harvest. Bass crowded. So yeah, there's several ways to control a bass crowded situation. You can do a winter drawdown, and that just decreases the amount of water in a pond, and gives the predator more easily access to the prey, and that'll help control a stunted bluegill situation. Or you can even put a fish feeder out there and feed your fish, and that'll help your sunfish grow. And then as your sunfish grow, the bass will eat the sunfish, and it'll just go up the chain from there. And then you can fertilize a pond as well. And there's several videos on YouTube on fertilizing, and there's several resources out there on fertilizing a pond. And that all that can help a bass crowded situation. So if your sunfish crowded, you'll want to suspend your bass harvest. You'll want to stock more bass to help, control the sunfish population. You'll want to feed your sunfish with a fish feeder or just throwing fish food out, and then consider fertilizing as well. But a sunfish crowded pond is great for kids. So there'll be a ton of little bluegill that are willing to bite, and you can take a 6 to 8 year old kid down there and just have a good day out there catching a bunch of bluegill. And it's actually the best for having 1 or 2 large bass in a pond. Sunfish crowded pond is one of the best situations for that, where you'll have, 1 big bass down there cruising around eating all the little sunfish. And that's seen here where you got all these little sunfish and then one big mama bass eating them up. And then these are all species you don't ever want to put into a pond. A lot of them eat forage that bass want to eat. A lot of them overpopulate. Crappie in particular are voracious reproducing fish. They overpopulate in some reservoirs, so they really do it in ponds. And then of course flathead catfish and blue catfish that we mentioned earlier. It's but illegal to stock those in public water. So if your pond is considered a public stream, if it's on a public stream, we will not issue a permit for flathead or blue catfish in a pond. In grass carp, we have a pretty strict grass carp application process. There's actually a list of plants you can look up that grass carp will eat, and you can ID those plants and say, hey, I got these plants in my pond, can I stock grass carp to help control them? And usually that's these submerged aquatic weeds like hydrilla and elodea and bladderwort that grass carp will eat, but they don't eat a lot of the floating plants like duckweed. They won't eat a lot of duckweed or parrot feather. And they don't eat a lot of the bank grasses like alligator weed and cattails. So if you have issues with those, then grass carp is not typically a good management tool for those plants.
So that's interesting personally here, because our son has a 2-acre pond associated with his property, and it's got a pretty heavy layer of water meal all across the surface. I mean, it looks like green grass from one end to the other. Depending on if the wind blows, it starts opening up, but a lot of times it's just there. And not discovered a good solution for it. It's not going to be the grass carp, I guess. Are there any other?
No, there's some herbicide control. And I would actually recommend reaching out to NC State. The NC State Aquatic Weed Program would know the exact, herbicide recipe and timing to control the water meal. I know it's one of the hardest ones to control.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, you definitely don't want to try to throw grass carp in there to control that issue. They love these, they're usually leafy and very tender plants. And all of these plants that have more of a sturdy stem, they don't eat those as readily.
Don't grass carp, and correct me, eat dead animal and plant material?
They will, especially once they've eaten all the green growing plants. They'll start to eat whatever they can get their mouth around, because they're literally starting to starve. And we've seen that at some reservoirs where if they were stocked in a reservoir by the whoever manages it, that they've eaten everything else and now they're going after whatever they can find. So that's usually a bad sign that they've done their job, and you don't need to put any more in, because they do want the green luscious stuff first and foremost. All right, so we went through that. And then just like our reservoirs, what we do in our reservoirs, you can do it in your pond. You can put, PVC plastic homemade fish attractors. You can cut a tree down off the bank and let it sit. You can put your, your old Christmas tree every year. You can go throw it in your pond. I did that a lot as a kid. I actually grew up on a small farm pond, and we put, every time we had a Christmas tree in January, we go throw it in the pond. And this is more for you than it is for the fish. It'll let you know where your good fishing holes are, and it'll give the fish somewhere to hide and somewhere for you to exploit them. And then fish kills, especially during a drought, can be a big problem. Sometimes if you're fertilizing near your pond, or your pond's near a golf course, you'll have a lot of runoff that causes an algal bloom, and then the algal bloom then causes an oxygen issue. And then if you kill a bunch of plants at once, so say you got hydrilla and you treat the hydrilla all at once, then those plants dying can actually consume oxygen and cause a low DO event. Sometimes a pond will flip if it's deep enough, and the fish will get caught in that stratification flip, and that'll cause a low DO stress event. And then, there could be spawning stress that cause a fish kill, pesticides, herbicides, you name it. These can be very pronounced in small pond scenario. And if you think there's like a bad, like a chemical or something going on, then you can report that to DEQ, and they're the people responsible for fish kills in the state, and you can report those fish kill activities on the DEQ website.
Have you ever seen a situation where extreme cold weather would basically wipe out a large number? I saw that in Florida, where it became a feast for the bald eagles.
Yeah, the birds will definitely come in right after a fish kill, and you'll know, and all the buzzards show up and things start flying around, that you had an issue. It's usually summertime in the South versus winter. Usually like a big rainstorm in the summer can cause some DO issues. Or then if you get a big rain that flushes a lot of stuff into a pond, you can have issues after that. So it's usually a summertime problem in the Southeast. And that is probably all I got tonight for you guys. The Division of Water Resources is a great resource for pond owners. You can, report algal blooms, you can report fish kills, and this doesn't even have to be on private ponds. This could be, if you see a fish kill on Jordan Lake, you can report it to the Division of Water Resources. You can call me, and then I will do the same, but you can go straight to the source too. And then here's our link to our pond management guide, and I can send this as a PDF out if y'all need it later to have this link, and it's got great resources for pond owners. And that is all I had.
We can't hear you, Kara.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate y'all inviting me tonight.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you were our first fisheries program that we've had, and
Okay.
it was really an enjoyable experience. Thank you so much for taking the time and spending it with us and sharing all that information. And sounds like you're giving us a lot of good references, as well as how to reach out, for the various questions or assistance that we might need. And that's very helpful.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Seth.
Always here to help. And if I can't get you the answer, I can get you to the person that has the answer. So
perfect.
Yes, Seth, it was great. Really enjoyed this.
So I guess we'll sign off now and say goodnight to everybody that joined us tonight. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did, and stay tuned. We got more stuff coming. Again, I want to point you back to our website. Keep up with all the activities that we do, not just webinars, but getting out and doing conservation work hands-on. Have a good night.
thank you.
Good night.